It's Butley and Patch. It's Patch and Butley. It's Patley. How bad was that? I even voice cracked halfway through.
You did voice crack. That was amazing.
I'm never doing that again. Now the pressure's on you. You can do it.
Okay.
Quick thing. This is random encounters I talked about. I was just randomly walking past. And the cool thing about random encounters, you can take yourself out of the party. So if you want to do a battle with whatever custom team, you get those options. Anyway, I just wanted to say that while it was happening. This is Tactics Ogre to everyone out there. We are up to like our 6th episode in the series. If you don't understand why I did the Singarinos at the start there, you need to check out the Civilisation. We haven't titled it. The Australian Civilisation game video we did. Yeah.
I think I'll call it Australian Crossover Adventure.
Okay. Here you can call this one Episode 6 Singing Crossover Adventure. Oh dear. I'm so embarrassed. I have the worst singing voice, as you can tell. I have no throat for it. Dear. This was...
It's okay, while you're away I was belting out Lion King in the kitchen, so...
Well, I was humming the Zelda theme. So there we go. We are fully into the geekdom of amazement things. Nabeth here that we're looking at, we defeated him last time. It was kind of an optional mini-boss, I call him. He was supposed to hold the tower and we took it off him. And this is what we're going on to now. Duke Runny? I've always thought it was like Roundway or Rowney without the W. He wants us to go and make a treaty with the Dark Knights, who are the ones that slaughtered our hometown, so we're not really happy about that. But we'd rather win the war, and so if we have to sacrifice a couple of battles, we will do that. Most of this video is just a big long battle, actually, because most of the battles are not going to get long, but they're going to take a little bit of time. So we might just watch. I actually, I'm trying to predict. I sort of have a rough idea, right, of what's coming in each of these battles, but I can't quite remember exactly the order that they're in. And so I'm trying to predict a little bit what we're facing, and it doesn't always work out.
I'll keep that in mind and not judge.
Well, I can't remember if I put the double clerics in this one or not, or if I go with double archers. Because you've seen, you get undead, well, you need multiple clerics, and if you get flat, you want archers, or if you get hills, you really need mages or rune fencers to get up the hills quicker. And anyway, it'll get better as it goes on, but for now, I'm just trying to give everyone a bit of time and hopefully predict what's coming up. Anyway, we talked about Civilizations. We did a little video on Civ 5, and we were going to segue into talking about
this is our segue.
Yeah, that's about as good as I get for
Civ has been a much loved game for us since we started playing it with Civs 4. Didn't get into the earlier Civs, unfortunately, but Civs 4 was really great. I don't know when you first started playing Butley. Did you start with Civs 4 or Civs 5?
I think Civs 4. Correct me if I'm wrong, and this is not factual, this is my interpretation of the series. There was when the earlier Civs came out, it was... common's not the right word, but there was a lot of things like that. I can't remember names of some of them.
Yeah,
the genre.
I agree, yeah.
There was several of them.
The 4X genre.
Yeah, 4X and turn-based strategy and stuff like that went over generations and stuff. I don't think Civs was the only one in the market, but it's definitely one of the only ones that's sort of sustained that you would say is this kind of strategy game.
Yeah.
There was another one in real time, but I can't remember what it was called now. It was like Cities to something, or Rise of Nations, or something. Can't for life
there's been a lot of them. Cities to something sounds like something I'm familiar with. Rise of Nations was almost purely... it was more of an RTS, but it had the similar sort of you build lots of cities mechanics. So.
Okay. It could be. I mean, I'm getting a bit. They were sort of in this. It's almost as if the world changed out of RTS and got into this kind of 4X. A lot of RTSs went this way, sort of thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
point being that Civ's kind of outlasted, and I feel like Civ's 4 was, when I got into it, and Civ's 4 was like a generation when most of the other ones were phasing out.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lull in like the sort of 4X games, I think, around that era.
And so now Civ's 5, I was all over it. I think I played enough of Civ's 4 to be really interested at Civ's 5, and I liked some of the up front. I liked some of the changes in Civ's 5. I liked the social policies ahead. I didn't like the way the Civ's. I shouldn't really go into this because that's what we're going to go into. I liked some of the things they created in Civ's 5 initially, so that's why I got into that.
Well, why don't we be like front with it and say we're going to be talking strictly about the games in their fully completed all DLC form, not in like on release, because it's it's more representative of the games as they are now if you get all the DLC. So we'll talk about that rather than on release things, because Civ's 5 was missing a few things compared to Civ's 4. Well,
And I also want to talk about them in order. Like, I don't want to say I liked this in Civ's 5 because without having mentioned sort of what I didn't like in Civ's 4, that would make sense, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think we were going to try and stick to a pretty straightforward, like, pros and cons review of it. I don't want to just, like, tick off all the sections of the game and go military, politics, science, like, just bring up the things you like. So I think you might have actually played more Civs 4 than I have. I played a little bit with you guys and a little bit on my own, but probably not a lot overall. I know Civs 5. I know how to play Civs 5 really intricately, but I forget some of the specific units and stuff. And I've watched a few videos on the upcoming Civ 6, and you will probably go into that quite blind, only with second-hand knowledge.
Not watched. I have nothing on Civ 6. I kind of didn't want to know too much because I didn't want to spoil it for myself.
Right.
But did we want to start with Civs 4 then? Or?
Yeah, so I was going to pass to you. That gives you an idea of where we're coming from. So we get more or less informed in terms of who knows what and when. I don't know why this told me this tutorial right now. It might be because I got control of Leonard. No, I think he's on his own here. I can't remember. Anyway, let's go. You can lead off. So maybe go through one of the best or a couple of the best things in Civs 4, and we'll just start there and go.
Well, Civs 4 has a lot of like appeal, like in terms of expanding and building your nation and things. Like there's a lot to go on there. You can spend a lot of time choosing where to put your settlements, and you will end up in the average game building a lot of cities in Civ 4. Military was hugely important. It was definitely a very contentious point, but I'll get to that in just a sec. I don't know, it's sort of one of those, it was a very polished experience. Now that I've played Civs 5, and I don't mean to compare too soon, but now that I've played Civs 5, I can see that Civs 4 was lacking in a lot of things to do fields. Like there wasn't a lot of peripheral things, but what was there, the city building and management, and the army building and management, was such a core integral part of the game and was so fulfilling in of itself that it made the game a very fun game to play. But the big one that sort of makes or breaks Civs 4 would be the Doom stack. And basically how Civs 4 worked, for those who haven't played it but have played other Civs games, is your entire army could theoretically stack on a single tile. And how combat works was your unit attacks and an opponent unit defends, and they attack each other at the same time, and one of them lives and one of them dies. The one that lives might lose some strength overall and have to heal up over the next few turns, but basically almost always one unit was eliminated. So this meant battles were very, very careful. You had to be very careful with how you battled.
Right, because you could end up wasting a lot of units, even if you had a greater stack. If you had bad matchups, you could. So a good example, let's just say like warriors v archers v like knights. Now your knights would run over the archers, but if you send your warriors to fight a couple of their archers, they would just like fall. They would just get wrecked before they even got in there.
Yeah,
So you had
archers,
to be careful about.
well-
I have to make sure my knights go first to clean the archers out, so my warriors can get a free run at whatever's behind the archers.
Well, it's funny because there was a little bit more to it than that, because it wasn't strictly like paper, scissors, rock, so to speak. There was actually like a complex web of what beat what, and it's very involved when you get into it. But the most important thing to know about it is catapults could hit more than just units, more than just the unit they fought. So if you had many units stacked on a single tile and a catapult attacked that tile, a catapult could hit multiple units and weaken your enemy's army overall. So ideally what you would do is build, say, 4 or 5 catapults in your army, send them out first until your opponent is sufficiently weakened, then send all your other units to clean up. So this became like a battle of positioning, because whoever had defensive high ground or whoever got the first swing with catapults could really swing how the battle played out. And you had to be very careful with it. This is also interesting because cities didn't have any sort of self-defense. If a unit walked onto an unguarded city, that city was instantly captured. Cities did not attack. The only thing they did provide was a defensive bonus for units already on them. So
if we put a little bow around the death stacks while we're talking to that, if I had to sort of try and summarize it a little bit, I guess I'd say they were good in the sense that once you got down to the nitty-gritty, the intricacy of how you manage your units in a combat with multiple stacks. They're called death stacks just because they could get so big, but just stacks in general, right? Stacks is just general warfare. You could get multiple stacks fighting, and you had to like manage the sequencing. As you mentioned, catapult strategy is one thing. Sometimes I would like throw weaker units on the sword to bait out some of their strong units, so my strong units wouldn't get so hurt stomping theirs, blah blah blah. So there's a lot of detail in there, but that was sort of also the negative side of it. And you said that, like, it depends whether you liked the stacks or not, right? Depended a lot on whether you liked dealing with that level of detail.
Yeah, a lot of people really hated Doom stacks because a lot of people believed that Doom stacks made the game very one-sided. You set up 2 giant stacks opposing each other, and whichever stack won typically was seen to have won the war. And
what I would
in many
call
ways,
the Heroes on Might and Magic curse.
yeah, in many ways that's true, but I don't know. I personally, after playing a lot of it, and I did play a fair amount, I would say there's more depth and complexity than just 2 stacks opposing each other, because you can just move a few units away and attack an opponent's unguarded city with, say, 3 or 4 or 5 units and capture cities. And what is your opponent going to do with their Doom stack? Well, they have to split it up now and weaken it. And so there's lots of like choice. Like there's a lot more that goes into it, but some people just don't like it. And I can totally respect that people do not like the idea of having one giant stack of soldiers, because you primarily did.
Yeah, and that's right. And it sort of it was very polarizing. I guess we should move on from just talking military butt, because we've like half the video. And we're supposed to go through 3 things.
Well, I'll quickly cover the other major parts of Civs 4, and that was civics. In Civs 4, you had civics, which were things like bureaucracy, communism, free religion, those sorts of things, and they were split into 5 different groups. And as you teched up through the game, you unlocked more of these civics, and you chose 1 civic of each group to use. So you sort of did progress down the civics, so to speak.
It made like 5 mini tech trees. If you know what I mean? Like one of them was sort of how you deal with your people, one was sort of how you run your government, one was sort of what religions you follow and your religious practices is a better phrase.
And one was economic.
So they were all like mini tech trees, but not your main tech tree, if you know what I mean. They weren't R&D, they were just,
Yeah. Worth mentioning, this was an okay part of the game, but it definitely wasn't a stellar part because there wasn't a lot of choice or depth involved into it. You pretty much just went the same ones each time as you progressed down the tree, with only minor variation off very specific case scenarios.
And some of it was balanced, there was
yeah.
like a war civic that you could switch to, but you basically never did because the impact from that was not worth losing the economic benefits that you would normally have.
Yeah.
And just things like that. So some of it was balanced, some of it was just, this one's the best, and by the time you've unlocked it, because it's further down the tech tree, why would you ever go back?
And then the other final point I'd like to bring up, because this pertains very specifically to Civs 5, religion. Religion in Civs 4 was very simple. If you were the first to research a certain tech, you got the religion related to that tech. That gave you a gold benefit for every civ that had your religion, and towards the end of the game, you'd just have every civ would have every religion. So every civ that had a religion would, have a small gold boost.
Right.
And that was not very deep mechanically. It was just very plain.
But it meant you didn't have to adjust your playstyle based specifically on if you rushed a particular religion or a particular trait.
That is true.
You just managed, and it's like, okay, well, I don't get the extra tech from this, but I can still build the pagodas or whatever,
Yeah. And so that's about all for...
What I wanted to... Sorry to cut you off. What I wanted to talk
ahead.
about, which I think, but to me is significant, is a little bit of like resource management. So in Civs, you have to go out and send your workers to build on resources and stuff like that. In Civs 4, you had to build roads and linking pathways to and from all your resources. Yeah. That's pretty significant. It made your management of resources quite, not complex, but almost overly busy, because you had to build roads to because later on when you've got resources everywhere and you've got cities everywhere, you just, there was an automated build roads function that just basically put a road on every tile, so you never had to worry about it. And that's when you know you're probably a bit crazy over the top with that. The other thing though is resources. So I liked the way they had, you could be I think there were farms or cottages, and they grew over time with your city. Cottage would grow after 30 or 40 turns into a hovel or something, and it would grow into a townhouse, and then it would grow as your city grew. And the reason I mentioned that is because it was interesting, it was different. It wasn't just build a building, it gets X. A lot of it is build a farm, you get X. Build this, you get X. And that was different and unique and interesting.
Well, this is maybe breaching, I don't know what the word I'm trying to find is. Maybe getting into a topic that's a little bit too specific to the game, because the reason it worked that way was actually strategic. You could go for cities with lots of food, or you could go for cities with lots of gold, and there were two different strategies involved with that, primarily about how much research you get. So that's one part of it.
So we should...
just quickly, one thing you mentioned was workers, and I just totally slipped my mind that in Civs 4, workers stack. So they can have multiple workers working on a single job at a time, whereas in Civs 5, they just simply don't.
Yeah,
just changed how the game played.
It protracts how long it takes to do anything. I had a point. I can't remember what it was.
Did you want to move on to Civs 5 then?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So, Civilizations traditionally is... How you play is measured in two ways, really. If you were describing your game to someone who's familiar with Civs, there's two styles. And the phrases, I believe, are tall and wide.
Yes.
And so tall is where you get as much food as you can on one or very few cities. And your idea is just to be massive cities that have everything in them that are just huge, and they can produce way better than anyone else, and they will just carry you through with science or whatever. The other one is wide, which is where you go the opposite. You tend to try and keep a lot of your cities low and have a lot of cities. They need to be small so they're manageable, because there's a lot of costs in the game that can spiral out of control, like trying to keep everywhere happy and trying to have enough money to sustain them all and that. And the idea is to grow, and you take all the space, you capture all the resources you can find, you own all the key like trading areas or ports and things like that. So that's tall and wide, and that's something that is managed sort of differently in these two games, I believe.
Definitely.
So if we go to Civ 5, the best way to talk about it, I guess we talk about it comparative to Civ 4 and the things we mentioned.
Yeah.
So if we start on military, because
yeah,
obviously the amount and the way we talked about Civ 4 and the military in there, it was a big deal, and I said it was very polarizing if you liked it or not. In Civ 5, it's like they heard the criticisms about the stacks and they decided to completely go the other way. And military in Civ 5 is almost like, not broken, but it's not very fun, to the point in actually really spoiling the whole military aspect of the game, in my opinion.
Well, I'd argue that it doesn't completely spoil it, but in terms of warfare, I do believe that military in Civ 5 is sort of bad, and it's not just because of the units or because of one unit per tile. It's because of other features as well, but the fact that it is one unit per tile really damages the game a bit, because you do have to just, every unit you have to move one at a time, and it just
I can see where they
slows
came
down
from.
the game.
Between the games, Civ 4 was a grid, a square grid.
Yeah.
And in Civ 5 they said, well, we don't want to stack up, but we're going to make it so one unit per tile. Ranged units can shoot further. You know, there's a bit more intricacy in how all that works. And, see on screen there, I shot my own guy. You have to get like a proper line of sight, and I just did that to show that I didn't quite get it there.
No.
In Civ 5, they obviously went, well, we're not going to let things stack, but we're going to create a hexagon grid. And so you'll be able to like maneuver your units around, so you can still attack, not with a stack, but you can still like surround units and gang up. You can have like lines of scrimmage. In reality, that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, so worth mentioning that what I've seen is there's two different sort of fields for this whole military thing. Or three, I guess. There's people who don't really know better, and then there's two groups of people who do know better. And the one group of people who know better don't build anything. And the other group of people who know better build their entire territory as units. And that's because if you've got your entire territory as units, and your opponent kills one unit, and you build a unit, that new unit just pops to the front. And you basically enter a perpetual state of you cannot lose and you cannot win battles. Which is an alternative sort of
the way the AI works, when faced with that, they would just never attack.
The AI do handle it very poorly. And
that's a big part of it too. The AI doesn't tactically know how to maneuver. Sometimes it does good stuff, and it definitely has. And I don't usually try and say things like, "Oh, the games are rigged," but the AI has pretty perfect knowledge of exactly how much random damage it's going to do on any particular attack.
Yeah, sometimes they'll mess up slightly, but the thing is, the AI is good at brute force. That is what they're best at.
And they're good at collecting the right mix of armies too, like range, short range, siege, whatever.
And for some reason, barbarians always seem to inconvenience you more than the AI, especially when you're at war. But that could just be biased.
I think to some degree the barbarians harass people who are lesser defended, and naturally you're generally lesser defended.
Yeah, maybe.
But so the point being is that military is still, it's probably not quite as polarizing in this game. I threw a rock at her.
Didn't even knock it down.
Just so on, I think that's Joannis. I changed him to a barbarian, but he's level 1. Yeah. So he's basically just a passenger on this whole battle, because he can't deal any damage, because you have to sort of be within one level to deal any real damage to anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, so military in Civ 5, I wouldn't say it's as polarizing, but mostly just because, not because people don't care as much, but because it's not as significant. Battling
it's definitely
and going to war is almost not worth it in a lot of cases, and it really tarnishes the game, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's really a sour note. So that's sort of... I can see what they were going for, but I don't think it ever really worked, and none of the expansions or changes ever changed anything related to that, as far as I'm aware, so it just never got better.
No. In fact, in some cases, they had to nerf certain units because the AI couldn't handle them. Specifically horsemen. Horsemen were just too tough for the AI.
Yeah.
And that's just a sign of, like, your mind's in completely the wrong place in game design when you're nerfing a unit because your AI can't deal with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let's breeze through a few of the other things we talked about. Roads now. You don't need a road to get to your resources. And in my opinion, that's good because you don't need as many workers. And it lets you decide if you build a city and you want to get a few workers and get all your resources working and things like that, you can. And if you don't, you can still afford to not do that and like not... It's not like a one fits all sort of strategy. Yeah. So you can.
Whereas in Civs 4, you had to build those roads to the resources, or you simply just didn't get the benefit from them.
Right.
Like
so
you just got the tile boost.
So typically, you needed lots of workers in every city because you needed to be busy, especially early on in their cities' lives.
You know, half the problem we're having in this comparison is there's lots of little things that are important that just can't be covered in the amount of time we have.
Right.
One of the things that's important in Civs 4 is health. Cities have health as well as food. They've got two different stats to measure their growth. If you've got too much unhealthiness, then you can't grow. You lose food based off how much unhealthiness you've got. And a lot of resources gave you health, like a lot of, I think cows did, I think rice did. They gave you health, and so it was very important to build on those resources. But if you didn't build on them, you still got the...
with happiness? Is that how that worked?
I think so, yeah.
So in Civ 5, in comparison to that, instead of having like how healthy each of your cities were, they created a global happiness feature. So every person you have adds like one unhappiness, and every person, a lot of different things, all your resources and stuff give you happiness as well. So if you grew too much, you got more unhappy. If you built too many like purely industrial buildings and things like that, people got unhappy, and so you had to like take time out to build things like cultural buildings that would give you happiness, like coliseums and things. And in case you can't tell by my tone, I don't think this was very well received in any regard.
No.
It's almost like a step backwards, because when you were managing food and health in Civ 4, you were doing it on a city-per-city basis, and now you're managing a global, and it's kind of silly, and it feels cheap. So then you get like traits. So you get a religious trait, and it's like you get one global happiness. It's like, well, I'm not really dealing with any of the problems anymore. I'm just getting this generic global happiness, like whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a step back in complexity, and it was one of the more interesting mechanics.
Definitely. Happiness, and that was also contributing to why war was so poorly liked, is because when you captured a city in war in Civ 5, you got a massive unhappiness penalty. And if you have unhappiness, your cities grow at quarter speed. So you don't... it sort of leads you down this
hurts you.
spiraling...
It makes your military weaker, it costs you money, it can hurt your science and stuff. It hurts you in so many different ways.
Yeah, the lack of growth hurts your science, the lack of money hurts your science.
And early on as well, like, a big part of Civs sometimes is scrapping early on, where you don't... Like, later on it can get a bit... If I can just outgrow my military quicker than them, I'll win. So early on is where you do a lot of your, like, wily scrapping. If you're smart, you can outfox your opponents. And this happiness feature, when you don't have a lot of happiness, because you haven't had a chance to build the things that get you happiness, it was expensive to try and fight and take cities and have those early scraps, because your happiness would plummet. You couldn't even build the courthouses to... Courthouses help, like, punish when you take away... help to curb the punishment of happiness when you take a city.
Yeah.
And so, it was a huge problem, was the happiness feature.
And this contrasts to Civ 4, where in Civ 4 you had your local happiness. And... Sorry, just quickly, the reason this relates to Civs 4 is in Civs 5, research is basically based off your population. In Civs 4, research was not only your population, but also how much gold you had available. In Civs 4, you tended not to have a lot of gold unless you curbed how much research you were generating. You could modify what percentage of your money was going to research.
Yeah, Civ 4 was like,
yeah.
you have like a gross income, and then you would assign investments, and then you just whatever, all you get in your pocket is your net after the investments. Civ 5 doesn't really do that. You pay maintenance on your buildings and your on your click on your units.
And your roads,
but you tend to get all your money, and then you can decide where to spend it if you need to boost your other things.
And what I was saying earlier about there being two strategies of building a lot of food or building a lot of gold tied into the research, because one of the big features of these games is having the next unit ahead of your opponent, the next technologically advanced unit, could be a big difference. Like having rifles compared to muskets can win you a war. So in both games, having research is very important. And in Civs 4, there was sort of a couple of ways to go about getting research. You could have a lot of research available to you from having a high food, but you wouldn't have enough gold to buy it all. Or alternatively, you could have an excess amount of gold, so you could afford to keep your research capped out at 100%, but you might not be generating a lot base, so to speak. Whereas in Civs 5, you have research from...
They don't work like that. What you're saying is there's multiple ways, and in Civs 5, you either have research or you don't. Civs 5 is a lot like that. I'd say that's a good point in general. In Civs 5, you can choose, like, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, so I'm going to get culture. I'm going to do this, I'm going to get food. I'm going to do this to get gold or science or military. But there's no, like, multiple strategies to achieve the same thing, right?
No.
And in Civ 4, there definitely was. And like we mentioned religion, you have access to all the religion and all the buildings related. You could use those as like general things in Civ 4 to, you know, if you wanted to boost science but you didn't want to invest, you could build some more things that gave you science, or like, you had like different ways.
Gave you culture and science.
Yeah, you had different ways to
happiness.
Science was probably the wrong example. You had different ways to approach different things, is the point. Civ 5 is very straight. The trees of what you can do are very straight.
Yeah.
And it had, like...
There you go.
I don't know where I'm going with this. There's a lot to cover. We're not going to finish it all by the end of this video.
No, I think we should just try and hit on this research point really quickly. The point was... in Civs 4, if you researched religion and you built a temple, that temple gave you culture and maybe 10% research. Or if you built a monastery, it gave you culture, like a small increase to culture and happiness. And that meant you had, if you went into religion and you didn't have a religion, there were alternate things. Whereas in Civs 5, you can build a shrine or a temple, but if you don't have a religion, if you don't go into that field of things, a shrine or a temple isn't actually going to benefit you that much, and in many ways they could be even just a burden because they eat up gold.
I always laugh in Civ 5. In Civ 4, it's like saying any particular city accepts all religions. In Civ 5, it's like any particular city can only have one religion. It's funny if it's like a study on like the modern world, so backwards.
However, I think the important thing to say is Civs 4, for all our praise of it, or in this video, because I imagine we'll come back to this topic to talk about what we like about Civs 5.
Well, I haven't really done a summary of each game either. Like, I'd like to...
And so Civs 4, for all our praise of it, it was mostly just building cities, choosing what goes into those cities, building armies, and choosing how to fight with those armies. There wasn't a lot of other stuff. There wasn't religions you could choose. Civics were very straightforward. And Civ 5 brought a lot of those features in and gave you a lot more things to manage and do.
It's definitely in a good clear way. In Civ 5 what they tried to do, like where they tried to go from Civ 4 to 5. I just don't know about the execution.
Also, Civ 5 has better territory management. In Civ 4, it just expands at like a set rate. And if two borders clash, the one with the most culture will eventually overwhelm the other and take its territory. Whereas in Civ 5, you could buy tiles. Your city naturally expanded towards resources, and it was overall like a more fulfilling experience because you felt like your city was a little bit more organic.
Well, I didn't like
And
the Civ 4
yeah.
approach to that because it was like the mental slash theoretical slash intangible cultural morale sort of thing affected the
Yeah.
physical plane of your borders, and that didn't make any sense to me. Like they're
No.
two separate things.
Well, it's hard to represent culture and things like that.
Until you make Civ 6 and you get it right.
Here's hoping.
On that note, we will pass. We've still got to. I think we go into Civ 5 more. I think there's plenty more
Yeah.
to talk about there.
Oh, yeah,
I would
definitely.
like to cover at least culture and the social policies and
Yeah, definitely.
maybe a bit of the late game stuff. And I want to talk about Civ 6 a bit, and then we could swing back and just go, do I like this? Do I like that? A little bit more. That's what I'm thinking. So next video, welcome to that. We're still on our path to the castle, as you can see. I love this this view of the map, by the way. You can see the whole world. Anyway, have you got any parting words?
Thanks for watching.
I promise not to sing on the outro like I did on the intro. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time. Cheers.